Mr. Speaker.
Chris Hipkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Very, very pleased to take a call on this particular bill. I only have one question for the member who just spoke, and that is, if someone was going to steal another member's identity, why on earth would they choose his? Clearly they hadn't done their homework if they were going to choose Chris Auchinvoll's identity to steal. Clearly they're proving the Darwin theory if they were going to try and steal Chris Auchinvoll's theory. Mr. Speaker, what this bill it feels a little like the day of the jackal here today, because actually this legislation should have been passed quite some time ago, and would have been passed quite some time ago if the government hadn't put it on the back burner. Now, why did the government put it on the back burner? Well, let's go back, let's rewind the clock back and try and remember why the government might have put this legislation on the back burner. I believe they were dealing with a few identity-related issues at the time this legislation was languishing on the order paper. In fact, they had a member of Parliament who was part of the government stand up in the House and make a statement confessing that he had stolen the identity of a dead baby. And after he did that, suddenly this legislation, the government didn't want to debate it. They put it right down the bottom of the order paper. He was part of the government. If all those backbenchers over there can claim that they're part of the government, then David Garrett was part of the government.
What about Gareth Hughes? What about Chris Carter?
Well, Gareth Hughes is sitting right over there, and I don't think Gareth Hughes has done anything wrong. I think Maggie Barry should apologise to Gareth Hughes for that absolute slur on his character. I believe that Gareth Hughes is an upstanding citizen. I don't think he's ever stolen the identity of anybody, and I think Maggie Barry should stand up and apologise. And in fact, Maggie Barry's got no right to comment about identity theft because she's never done it, and therefore, under Maggie Barry's standing orders, she's not allowed to talk about it. Because if Maggie Barry hasn't stolen the identity of somebody, she shouldn't be commenting on it, because apparently, according to Maggie Barry, you can only actually talk about something that you've done yourself, and if you haven't, then you shouldn't be talking about it. Mr. Speaker, identity theft is an issue that all New Zealanders will have an interest in, because an average of 2,000 New Zealanders a day are affected by some form of identity scam. That's quite a significant number, 2,000 New Zealanders a day affected by some form of identity scam. And I think that I said in one of the earlier readings to this speech, to this bill, that I think nobody remembers it says Maggie Barry. Well, I can't remember a single thing Maggie Barry said in the House this year, other than insulting all of the other members of the House, so which she's quite good at. I have to say Maggie Barry's quite good at insulting other members. I don't think she's made any other contribution to the Parliament other than sitting up the back after long emotional dinners and slinging insults to the other members of the House. But as I said, Mr. Speaker, in one of the earlier speeches to in this bill, I think that issues around identity will be some of the most important issues that we deal with in this Parliament over the next few years, because fundamentally things have changed so much around the storage of personal information, the volume of personal information, and the propensity of people to release their own personal information quite freely, much, much more than they did in the past. So if we look at social media, for example, people release huge volumes of personal information about themselves that once upon a time just simply wouldn't have been anywhere near the public domain. Many of the forms of identity verification that are currently used are actually widely available. So if someone wants to set up a profile on a website, on many of the websites, they'll be asked questions like, what is their date of birth? Now, date of birth is used as an identity verifier in a whole host of online environments, and actually it's quite easy to get hold of. So I think that leaves people quite open to the prospect of identity theft. Mother's maiden name is another one, which is a piece of information that's not difficult to get hold of for many people, and is often used as a form of identity verification. So one of the things that is quite important, and one of the reasons the Labour Party is supporting this bill, is making sure that there are secure and reliable forms of identity verification available to New Zealand citizens so that they can have their identity verified. I guess there is a question for the government as to whether this will only extend to New Zealand citizens or whether maybe New Zealand residents might also be covered by this. And in fact, if somebody wanted to verify the identity of a New Zealand resident, such as, for example, verifying that they were in fact a New Zealand resident, would this bill apply? And this is very relevant to the government because their own spy bureau, for example, the GCSB, may wish to verify whether in fact somebody is a resident of this country, because it seems that the GCSB don't actually know whether someone's a citizen or a resident, and therefore whether they're allowed to spy on them or not. So Mr. .com, who was not a citizen but was a resident, was in fact protected. But the GCSB didn't seem to know that. They clearly, the government clearly don't have any sort of identity verification service within the spy bureaus of the government. They seem to think that they can do whatever they like without any sort of identity verification, and perhaps this bill might go some way to supporting that problem.
Thanks.
However, all those things aside, one of the things that New Zealanders are very concerned about is what the government is doing with their private and personal information. Because it's all very well for us to talk about what other people are doing with their private and personal information, but in fact under this government's tenure, New Zealanders have no certainty that the government itself isn't using their private and personal information incorrectly. And I asked the minister who is sitting over there, the Minister for ACZ, she's in the chamber tonight, what does the number 6,748 mean to her? To Judith Collins, what does the number 6,748... Much less than her majority. What does the number 6,748 mean to the Minister for ACC? Anything? Nothing. Getting nothing from the Minister for ACC. That is the number of people whose private and personal information was released by the ACC. And yet the Minister doesn't know that because she doesn't actually care about the ACC releasing people's private and personal information.
No.
Oh, what happened to the Minister who was the Minister of ACC at the time? He's coming back into Cabinet after Christmas, apparently. I'm sure Judith Collins will be there, welcoming him with open arms when he's restored to the Cabinet after Christmas. 6,748 people had their private and personal information released by the ACC. Then, of course, we've got the work and income fiasco. We don't know exactly how many people's private and personal information was released by the ACC, although we know quite a lot about two of the people whose private and personal information was released by work and income because they were released by the Minister. Paula Bennett released their private and personal information herself. She didn't think that was a problem because apparently if you criticise the government, if someone criticises the government, this government thinks it's okay to go look them up and just splash their private and personal information all over the media. That's okay, according to this national government. We move on to the IRD. The IRD, one of the government agencies who have some of the most private information about people, huge volumes of personal information about how much people earn, what do they pay in child support, a whole variety of those sorts of quite sensitive pieces of information. They actually have probably the best name and address database of any government agency. The IRD, I'd say without doubt, have the best name and address database of any government agency. It's the most up-to-date. The IRD have this amazing way of finding people, and yet New Zealanders can have no confidence at the moment that the IRD are actually treating that private and personal information with the care that it deserves, because we've seen the release of information by the IRD that really should have been held private. 7,000 odd documents accessed from Work and Income's kiosks. They didn't even actually need to release it. They just put their computers in the foyer area so that anyone could go and look it up. I think that New Zealanders would be quite concerned, and rightly concerned, that the government wasn't taking due care with their private information. And let's not get on to NovaPay, because I'm towards the end of a 10-minute... It doesn't work anyway, and I'm towards the end of a 10-minute speech, and there's another 20 minutes odd and a speech about NovaPay. But again, no certainty for people that their private information is being protected by NovaPay. As David Cunliffe points out, it actually would be more accurately described as no paying rather than NovaPay, because there's certainly no guarantee that even with all the private and personal information they hold, the people will get paid. It's a good bill, but it doesn't deal with many of the fundamental issues around identity theft and around the release of private and personal information, which this government are not dealing with.
I call Gareth Hughes.
Kia ora, Mr Speaker. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Kia ora. I rise to support the electronic identity